But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Hello everyone, and welcome to Honey Badger Radio. Today we are looking at another look at the culture war. This is Today in the Culture War, number 4, using VR to race bait, or using virtual reality and augmented reality as propaganda, or how I always suspected that the problem with art is often the artists. I am your host, Brian, and I am joined by Alison, the boss at HBR. And we're going to be looking at some, we're going to be looking at a podcast from a from a website called voicesofvr.com, who are, I guess, generally they just like talking about virtual reality and all the possibilities and everything. But this one specifically is entitled Racial Justice Using AR, which stands for Augmented Reality, to Reclaim History with Site-Specific Context. So, Alison, what led to you guys deciding to do this one? Us talking about this?
Anyway. My husband showed me this podcast because he listens to the Voices of VR religiously, and we were listening to it this morning because he wanted me to listen to this one in particular. And I was listening to it, and I was just, I have to say that my faith in the future went down a few notches as I listened to it. Just essentially what the individual is saying is he's trying to keep alive events that happened in the past that nobody was around to have participated in. And yet we still all bear the collective, or not all, I mean, white people in general, bear the collective guilt of, even if we weren't part of the white ethnicities that engaged in it. We all bear the collective guilt of something that happened well before we were all born. And we're going to keep that alive because reasons.
It's because the thing that virtual reality and augmented reality are made to do is to continue the thought processes of a distant past that we don't really know the truth about. I think that when it comes to stuff that's happened in history, in some ways it's nearly impossible to really know what happened, right? But they want to keep this stuff alive. So, and the reasons,
their version of it, you're right.
Yeah,
there isn't
their
really
version
a way
of it.
to know. Because it's a very simplistic narrative that they're going to present. One group, bad. One group, good. Just helpless suffering. And there's never the nuance that, hey, actually, if you take away this group's ability to identify and recognize when harms are done to it. For example, if you look at the monk debate with Jordan Peterson, Dyson essentially took away Jordan Peterson's right to recognize harms done to himself because he was a quote-unquote white male. And he always used the term white male. He never really referred to white people. He referred to white men, angry white men. And Dyson was taking away Jordan Peterson's ability to recognize when a harm was done to him, as long as the harm is done by one of the protected groups. Well, when you start to take away the ability for a group to recognize harm done to them, so you're delegitimizing white people, or in Peterson's case, white men, being able to say, hey, you just abused me. What's the next step? If they aren't even allowed to say, hey, this hurt me, this harmed me, then there is no end to it. I mean, once you cut somebody's tongue out, you do it for a reason. And that reason isn't just because you don't want to listen to what they have to say. It's because you don't want them to be able to talk about what you are doing to them. They don't want to talk. You don't want them to tell people what you're doing to them.
Mm-hmm.
And this is really disturbing. And it comes out of this lack of nuance that, Black people are people too. So they have all of the same potential frailties, moral frailties as white people. I don't even believe I have to say this. But if you give a group of people this kind of power over silencing another group of people, you're paving the way to future atrocities. And it's not going to be a compensatory thing here, because the people that will experience the backlash from past atrocity will not be the ones responsible for having done them. So it's going to be the moment that they start doing this to white people who have never been part of any of these behaviors. In fact, existed at a time when white as a race wasn't really even like the concept wasn't really well developed. During a lot of this time, there were white ethnicities still at each other's throats, killing each other. And yet we all bear the blame because of what white people did in the past and some other locale that we may not even have come from. And it's this kind of collective guilt and collective silencing, and this belief that somehow when you hand certain groups of people who were victims in the past the ability to silence and confer collective guilt, and then start pumping out the war propaganda, because this is war propaganda.
Absolutely.
When you start assigning collective guilt, when you start saying they got things that they aren't entitled to, that tribe over there got things that they aren't entitled to, and they did all of these damaging things to us. You start talking the narrative of privilege, you start talking the narrative of being oppressed by the tribe over there, that's setting up for something, and it's not good. And then you talk about delegitimizing anybody who is white, saying, hey, this is harmful to me. And all of this is stuff that you can't talk about now, because apparently everything that I'm saying are the building blocks to genocide.
Yep.
Okay. All right. You're not going to get a genocide on either side. What you're going to get is a civil war. And if everybody knows, civil wars are the most bloody and painful and destructive. All right. There you go.
So this podcast is it's 53 minutes and 30 seconds long, so it's quite long. We're not going to be able to watch the whole thing for obvious time reasons, so I've time-stamped a few, let's say, wokest takes, and we're going to go through those. If you want to listen to the full context, though, I have included the link in the low bar. Or in the description.
Wokest takes, indeed.
They are the wokest takes, and in this podcast. So yeah, be sure to just look in the low bar. In addition, I think this is important for other reasons as well. So let me play the first bit. Oh, and another thing is I'm not able, even though I've time-stamped it, the nature of this bar, like what do you call it, the actual time bar, I guess, of the cast is not accurate. Like, I can't get it to the exact moment I need to start it at. So I got to get it like kind of close and then play it from there. So I apologize for that. All right. So this is the context where they introduce the guest. Okay.
So this interview with Glenn happened on Sunday, June 17th, 2018 at the VRTO conference in Toronto, California. So with that, let's go ahead and dive right in.
So my name is Glenn Cantave. I'm 24 years old. I'm an activist, social entrepreneur, and performance artist. And I started a group called Movers and Shakers. We highlight the narratives of the oppressed people through virtual, augmented reality, the creative arts. And we're currently engaged in a summer campaign that basically uses VR and AR as the triggers for engagement to call out for the necessity for New York City to democratize access to knowledge of the history of marginalized communities on one end, and then the other aspect is pushing for participatory budgeting on the blockchain.
All right. So this is just so you know who we're talking about and what their goals are. They're going to use VR and AR technology to essentially influence people to act, to political and institutional action. Okay. And this is not surprising for me. Like I went to a VR conference. How long was it? Last year that I went with Jonathan to the VR conference?
Yeah, it was last year.
Yeah, last year I went to the VR conference. It was in Silicon Valley. And I was, you know, for the most part, it was people demoing games and entertainment and other experiences that you would expect to get out of virtual reality. You know, experiencing, if you've never been to another country, or if you've never visited, you know, maybe an ancient temple in China someplace, they had like this thing where they use photogrammetry to sort of recreate it in a 3D space, and you can like look at it, and it was very cool. And then there were games and stuff, but it is all pretty like, let's say more proof of concept type stuff. But there was a segment, a decent sized one, that saw the potential to use virtual reality to push narratives on people. There was one where you could experience the killing of Trayvon Martin, for example, where you were, let's say, you're a person that lived in the community, the gated community where Trayvon was shot, and you were there and you got to hear like the phone calls and that were actually the sound from the night, you know, and the police sirens and everything else. And what jumped to my mind immediately was, I was thinking, oh shit, people are going to use this to essentially propagandize things and push narratives. And the fact that it's that much more immersive, and the fact that the average person doesn't tend to do tons of research into stuff, and the fact that this has actually worked before. Like if you look at movies, they'll make movies about historical times, you know, like maybe a historical event, like Mel Gibson's movie The Patriot, which was about the Civil War, or the Revolutionary War rather, or Glory, which is about the Civil War, or any number of World War II films, or any number of movies about a certain time in history. A lot of people will watch them and think this is how it went down, this is what happened, because they don't tend to look, you know, deeper. So it definitely has potential to be exploited. And I expressed that concern, and I still have that concern. And I've even seen, there was a woman at the conference that was talking about how she could use VR to raise awareness about, you know, social, political, environmental issues. And my only thought was, well, is this going to be, are you going to be using VR to tell the truth? Or are you going to be using VR to tell people what you want them, what you believe, which is more likely, and therefore, you know, it can be more sort of use it as a form of propaganda. And that was the thing I was concerned with. So when I saw this, when I listened to this podcast, I wasn't all that surprised, because I knew that, like many other art forms, there would be people that would want to use it to create social change that I'm sure they believe is necessary, but could definitely cause a lot more harm than good.
In my case, when I listened to this, I was immediately jumped out. Who gets to decide what qualifies as an oppression? And who vets to make sure that this is historically accurate? You know, and that this is very dangerous territory. Having used VR, it's incredibly immersive, and it gives you a sense of place that nothing else can replicate. An engagement, like a mental engagement that I've never experienced with anything else. And I can see how this technology could be used to create memories and a social cohesion to a completely false narrative that that people won't even know is wrong or even think to question.
Mm-hmm.
It's the ultimate tool of authoritarianism. And to hear what they want to use it for, I mean, no one, when you embark on the path of genocide or authoritarian tyranny, nobody says to themselves, this is a beautiful day today. I think I'm going to outlaw anything that I don't agree with, and I'm going to make an entire police state. I'm going to make it impossible for people to think thoughts that I don't approve of. Nobody starts their day thinking that they're going to become an authoritarian dictator. or that they're going to encourage authoritarianism. And I presume that this individual doesn't think that it either. And yet this idea that you're only allowing certain people to speak and that you have delegitimized people expressing, certain groups of people expressing harms done to them, that is the path of authoritarianism. That is the path of dehumanizing groups of people.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so ironic because I recently saw a tweet of the pyramid of white supremacy, and at the bottom is saying, you know, white, all lives matter, you know, and white people are okay.
It's okay
the
to be white.
bottom is, it's okay to be white.
Yeah.
That was the bottom, or, you know, that was in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So any way of defending against being this collective guilt, any way of defending against this arbitrary collective guilt. I mean, I thought Dyson said that race was arbitrary, but regardless, this arbitrary collective guilt, any way of white people defending themselves against it, just like men prior to this with patriarchy, it's illegitimate. It's evidence. And me saying these things is evidence that I want to kill people like Brian.
Mm-hmm.
And that's dehumanizing. In fact, that is the most dehumanizing rhetoric. I mean, it's like, I'm watching this guy pick up a gun and point it at people. And I'm going to be saying, well, are you going to shoot someone with it? Oh, no. We're not going to go that far with this gun. He loads the gun. We're not going to shoot anyone with this gun. Just stay still there.
Well, he's also
aiming and pointing.
Yeah, he's also blaming you for putting the gun in his hand and making him point it at you. Because that's another thing is it's your fault that they're even... That's what Michael Eric Dyson said when he says, you know, we weren't allowed to have an individual identity because of you. Which is basically a way of saying, I have this gun and I'm pointing it at you and it's your fault. Right? Because personal accountability, what's that? I don't know what that is. That doesn't sound... That sounds like white supremacy to me. But the thing is, when it comes to this white supremacy rhetoric, to be honest, it's just another leg on the whole. It comes down to patriarchy at the end of the day. And I can explain, I'll go into it a little bit later, because that's all this is just another way of dressing up the patriarchy. It is about, I think that it's actually more about men than not. Despite the fact that this guy wants to make it about the white race.
I can state something on that. That's something to consider when you look at minority communities that have essentially been destroyed in the process of being exploited for victimhood points by politically powerful entities. When black men say that they are oppressed by white society, they have to abdicate a certain aspect of their masculinity and their manhood. Because if you look at manhood and the definition of manhood, it's essentially being able to take any circumstance that you're put in and turn it around and make it better for the people who rely on you. When black men embrace this intersectional feminism, which is really what this is, they have to essentially submit part of their masculinity to it.
Absolutely.
And I think that there's something to how black communities have been stripped of black men and black male mentors and mature black masculinity, and in being stripped of it have become very impoverished in that it's socially, not just financially, but socially. And it's all a result of this exploitation, this victimhood exploitation by intersectional feminism. And it's sort of, so I get what you're saying, and I think we can have a really interesting conversation about that. And I'm throwing out a lot of jargon, so I apologize to those of you who are listening. If you have any questions about it, put it in the comments, and I can't promise that I'll have time to respond to them, but I will read them. And the next time I talk about this, I will try to incorporate your questions. So if you have questions about anything I'm saying, I will read it. I'll incorporate your questions and attempt to answer it the next time I bring stuff like this up, because I know it's complicated concepts. So why don't we take the first...
Let's go into the things. Also, 420 praise it. All right, so first hot take he's going to talk about, or woke take, talks about how to access the AR. Now, we can play the audio clips longer because there's no video component, But I still have there because the thing is the guy's pretty long-winded in his explanations because he uses a lot of let's say convoluted language to some degree, like to make his point because he doesn't want to get
Sort of like me.
yeah, sort of. But I mean, he's doing it to avoid being seen for the hateful and angry person that he actually is. So
to break down why. So you mentioned Howard Zinn's People History of America, and the issue is that, you know, it's amazing that you read it, but you know, it's a 600-page plus really thick book. Most people are not going to read that book unless they're getting paid to do so or some sort of teacher is forcing them to read it. So the value of augmented reality and what we're doing in this context is that we're creating something that literally we have an app where the images come to life. And so I like to think of it as something that's visually compelling, and we're distilling the work of your Howard Zinns and Michelle Alexanders of the world into something that someone can get through in 5 to 10 minutes. And it's our goal to have these type of installations in public spaces so that New Yorkers can download the app for free and get the real story.
all right, I'm just pausing it there for a moment. So he is telling us that, so there was this big, really thick 600-page book that he thinks is, you know, the average person is too dumb or too lazy to actually read it, right? So he's going to do us a favor. He's going to compress all of the wisdom and knowledge and wokeness of that book into a 5 or 10 minute augmented reality experience. Now, we didn't do this before. I probably should explain what augmented reality is in case you don't know. You know what VR is. That's when you fully immerse yourself and, like, you know, everything around you is sort of created or generated by the program and the hardware. Augmented reality is where you are wearing goggles or you're using your phone, kind of like Pokemon Go, to look at the actual environment you're in, but it adds extra elements to it. So you might, let's say, I don't know if they would have existed, it probably does, or it will very soon. Let's say you had a Hatsune Miku, I think that's her name, the little like VR idol girl. If you had an augmented reality version of Miku, she would appear in your kitchen or in your living room, sitting on the couch or something. And so you would still be able to see, and you wouldn't, you know, bump into shit moving around the space, and she would be there. So that's augmented reality. So he's talking about using augmented reality in subways and in other like sort of points of interest that would essentially alter people's perception of reality and distill, which is his words, a very complex and likely nuanced, but who knows, book into a 5-minute bite that basically says what he needs to say in a really short amount of time. You mean an AI, Brian? I don't know. I'm not, maybe. I mean, it depends on who we're talking about. But augmented reality, that's what it does. Is that right, Allison?
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
Augmented reality is an addition to reality, whereas virtual reality is recreating reality entirely.
Mm-hmm. I actually really like augmented reality. When I tried it out, I liked it. I wasn't, because, you know, when I was wearing VR goggles, I was afraid that moving around, there was a part of my brain that knew that I was in a booth. And I was afraid of tripping or walking into a wall or something.
Yeah, that can be problematic.
Yeah. But with AR, I could see where I was, and it was interesting how they sort of like put it in there. Hatsune Miko? I don't know. You know who I'm talking about. Okay, so I'm going to continue the rest of this sound clip, and then we'll go into, he talks about the truth about Christopher Columbus, because the Christopher Columbus is a person that he especially hates. So we need to understand that, because he's going to use AR to make his point about Christopher Columbus.
What is the real story of Columbus?
The real story of Columbus is one of genocide. People don't realize that 2 years after he was on the island, half of the Arawak population was wiped out. It started off with 250,000 people. Half was literally wiped out. And I understand, you know, there were different implications in terms of disease that the indigenous people were not resistant to, but it doesn't end there. A lot of pushback that I've gotten from conservative Italian voices was that we're judging Columbus by the standards of 2018, and I don't see that to be the case. What most people do not realize is that if you read Columbus's diary, he explicitly wrote that 9 and 10-year-old girls were in high demand. We're talking about sexual slavery of children, pedophilia rampant while he is the governor of Hispaniola. Okay? And so I don't care what standards you're from, pedophilia transcends generations and it's morally wrong. Moving forward, what people also do not realize is that the Spanish crown themselves realized that Columbus was too cruel to the people of Hispaniola. One example was the hawksbill punishment. You had to be 14, if you were 14 years old or older, you needed to give one hawksbill full of gold every 3 months. Like, it was a requirement. And if you did not do so, he would cut off both of your hands. And so the Spanish were thinking about this, and they're like, this man is extremely cruel. They threw him in jail. So someone who perpetuated pedophilia, perpetuated genocide, and was literally too cruel by the standards of the 1500s was placed in jail. But meanwhile, since 1892, has been glorified as a statue in New York City. And then if we look at broader in terms of the national context, there are two individuals who are praised with a holiday. That's Dr. King and that's Christopher Columbus. One, a human rights activist who gave his life for the cause, and the other, someone who literally facilitated genocide and catalyzed the genocide of 80 to 100 million indigenous people across 2 continents, as well as the transatlantic slave trade. That's why most black people are here, no?
All right. So this is his explanation of Columbus. I get the sense that it's not the whole story for a number of reasons. And it's funny how he glosses over stuff. And I think it's important because it's the reason. So I don't know if you noticed, but in the U.S., so I don't know how it is in Canada, but in the U.S. lately, there have been every year social justice warriors attacking Christopher Columbus Day with more and more fervor, talking about how all the terrible racist things that he did, all the terrible things to people because they were not like him, and all this other stuff that you cannot prove. No one would say that history wasn't bloody, right? And that there weren't things that people did that that we would not have done today. But I think that his view on things is really, really simple. I've heard lots of different accounts or lots of different bits on Christopher Columbus, and I don't think that even when I was a kid and I was learning about how he his story about finding America or whatever, I never thought it was something that was simple or made him a hero for it. I think that this stuff is just I don't know, I think that's just like the bloody history, right? Like somebody said, European empires made the world far less bloody. Yeah, like it begs some questions, right? Like, what was going on in the countries that he landed in before he got there? How bad was it?
Ooh, interesting thought. I'm just looking at Wikipedia, so it's got to be slanted towards people who believe this stuff.
Absolutely.
So when he was on his first voyage, he wrote, so the indigenous people he encountered, the Lycania, Taino, or Arawak, were peaceful and friendly.
Hey, Taino? That's my people. That's where I come from, the Taino.
Oh, okay.
So I'm entitled to an opinion on this, and it's actually more important than yours.
Okay, I will grant you that opinion.
I'm kidding.
As long as I get to have Holland and the French
sure.
voyageurs. Okay, all right. So from the entry in Columbus's journal of 12th of October 1492, in which he wrote of them, many of the men I have seen have scars on their bodies, and when I made signs to them to find out how this happened, they indicated that people from other nearby islands come to San Salvador to capture them. They defend themselves as best they can. I believe that people from the mainland come here to take them as slaves. They ought to make good and skilled servants before they repeat very quickly whatever we say to them. I think they can be very easily made Christians, for they seem to have no religion. If it pleases our Lord, I will take 6 of them to your highnesses when I depart, in order that they may learn our language. He also noticed that their primitive weapons and military tactics made them susceptible to easy conquest. Okay, so we're looking, if he's to be believed, which I'm sure that these individuals who are going to be writing the real history of Columbus, apparently these people, there were others, indigenous tribes who were taking them as slaves. So
Absolutely.
there was slavery, there was war. What a surprise. Slavery and warfare existed in North America before the white people came.
Absolutely.
or the Chinese, or
slavery.
the Norse.
Yeah, slavery, warfare, cannibalism, forced marriages. You know, like
Human sacrifice.
Yeah, human
It's almost
sacrifice.
like everyone's a human being.
And we all had our
That's
problems.
Oh,
Yes.
we all had our problems.
Almost.
And I'd also like to note that genocide probably existed in North America before white people came there too, because what we call the First Nations were probably the Second Nations. The First Nations were likely Aboriginal seafarers, so they're descendants from the same people who are
in Australia.
From Australia.
Yeah.
And they were originally colonized, I think, part of South America, and then they were killed.
I brought that up I brought that up
by
in
the immigrants.
Yeah, I brought that up in an argument I was having on Facebook about Native
How'd
Americans. Oh, they were so angry. It was quite fun. They were very upset.
I know that they're very upset, but everybody
But I mean,
in our past was warlike.
Yes, yeah, that was the thing. Like it's upset because they don't get the truth that they want. They just get the truth. I mean, and
yeah,
that's
they don't
not
get
convenient
the truth that they want.
Yeah.
Because they don't want Native people or Black people or minorities or Latinx. They don't want anybody. They don't want them to be human beings. They just want them to be ceremonial religious objects that they can protect. And
yeah.
And the problem with that is people have a tendency of overthrowing their ceremonial religious objects. I'd much rather be viewed as a human being. That, you know, it's like that's that they can go both ways here, but they don't view individuals as being fully human.
Yeah, and
Warts
also
and all.
No, for sure. And also because I think this is also a reason why they get upset about this, because they do believe in the idea or the principle of collective guilt on behalf of your race. They don't want to have to deal with the fact that their own race would then, by that logic, should create guilt in them, because they don't want to feel guilt, because it's not pleasant. And so when you tell them, well, you know, the people that you're sticking up for, because a lot of them are members of that tribe that they've claimed, yeah, they weren't really angels either, and there were problems, but you're just mad at the people who, in your mind, you see are the ones that won, you know. And then I wouldn't even say it's as simple as that per se, but this is how you want to view the world. So it can be very upsetting when you have to deal with the fact that, oh, maybe you also have your own internal guilt to deal with. So I got some super chats. Do you want me to read them out real quick? Okay. Yeah, you're muted, but I'm going to assume that you said sure. French Honey Badger.
I said sure.
Okay. French Honey Badger gives us $5 and says, this is the kind of guy that makes me hate the word artist. Also participatory. Yeah. I am an artist, and these are the kinds of artists that make me angry. But you know what? On the plus side, they're also the ones that they tend to be the worst at it. So I'm serious when I say this. I'm actually under the belief that this AR thing is going to be so bad. Like, it's just quality-wise, it's going to be so bad that nobody's going to want it. That's why they're giving it away for free, because it's shit. Okay. Frank Tomeo gives us $2 Canadian and says, this guy is a fucking psycho. You haven't even gotten, we haven't reached the high levels of woke yet. So just strap in, because it gets better. French Honey Badger gives us $5 and says, hatred of pedophilia transcends generation. Cue the Guardian, cue Islam. Yeah. The Guardian that wrote, you know, like, I'm a pedophile, but I'm not a monster, I think was the article. And several other ones defending pedophilia. But also, you know, something else I want to bring up about Christopher Columbus, all right? So he attacked, like, apparently a lot of Arabs died, okay? And he was working with Spain. Now, are there any events that could have taken place before Columbus's time that might have created a little bit of tension between the Spanish and the Middle East? I wonder if there is anything that happened to Spain. I don't know. I'm trying to think if maybe Columbus, as a representative of Spain and Italy, has some history with these people. Maybe it's not like, that's the thing. This guy's talking about this shit like it happened in a vacuum, you know, as though he knows it better than Christopher Columbus did in his own time. So let's not make this too simple. And in addition, I'm not saying I'm defending this, but we're talking. He's talking about 9 and 10-year-old girls back in like the 15th century. I don't know. You know, like this is a little bit oversimplified. Again, we're talking hundreds and hundreds of years ago.
I'd have to actually investigate that allegation.
Yeah,
I would have to before I would even comment on it. And I'd have to know who was creating the demand. You know, I'm going to have to investigate that allegation before I comment on it. That's all I can say. It's a highly emotively charged allegation, and I would prefer to do my research first.
Yeah. No, for sure. I'm not.
I
don't know if it's true or not either. I know that he's saying that, and he's basically like standing on he's standing on a morally emotional argument of I don't care where you're from, pedophilia is bad, but until it's not, which is you know, it's all about selective outrage, because it's not people that you're opposing that are defending pedophilia today. I don't know if you know that. So
yeah.
Frank Tomeo gives us another $2 Canadian, and he says everyone's evil, blow up the world. Well, can we wait until the Space Force happens first so that I can like try to colonize Mars and then, you know, you guys do it? Service guarantees citizenship. So, all right. So let's move on to
Kill a bug today.
Yes, that's right. Let's move on to the next hot take here.
Yeah, and as you tell this story, the thing that comes to mind is that there's a narrative that you're saying using language, and the challenge of augmented reality is, you know, how do you translate this complex, nuanced history that is a story that's pretty involved to very simple images and some sort of symbolic representation of that? Because we have these statues that are promoting some sort of symbolic image of Columbus, and yet you're trying to some way use images and the augmented reality to be able to change that. So how do you translate the complexity of this type of story into imagery?
So it's not exclusively imagery. The first iteration of our installation is the visual component, but we're also working on a soundtrack, and we're working with professors to make sure that we're hitting the main points and everything is academically verifiable, and we're going to translate that into poetry itself. People like listening to catchy songs, or Schoolhouse Rock used to be a thing. It's the next version of Schoolhouse Rock using this immersive technology.
All right. So
this is gonna be forced on school kids.
Yes, that's the reason why I picked this. So he acknowledges and recognizes the power of memes, which is what this is. You know, it's like Richard Dawkins' description of memes when he said memes are like a catchy song that you know, or a simple rhyme or something that people can find sort of that they can attach themselves to and they get addicted to right away, and then they can spread it easier. It's actually quite potent as an idea. And he also talked about using poetry for the meme part of it, so it makes it easier for people to remember, like chants, for example, and also using music. And now think about that for a second. How many times have you come across viral videos by Vox and Vice and HuffPo and Now This, etc., that uses music to establish a mood around a topic, to specifically get an emotional response, right? I remember, Alison, you and Mike did a video response, like a raging on a video, that if you took the creepy, scary music out of it, it would have just been something that anybody could have like thought critically about. But by putting the music in there, you can actually influence people's, what you're telling them what they should be feeling about it.
I remember that one. It was it's the manipulation music, and we pointed it out. It's this creepy sort of tinkly toy box. Mm-hmm. Oh, this is a creepy bunch of people. Anyway.
Oh yeah, that's right.
But yeah, it's like the same principle.
Yes, and yes, they are going.
And
for
I wonder.
Mm-hmm.
I wonder if he'll include information about what the natives were doing to each other when he presents this.
That's not convenient.
That's not convenient.
No, it's not. No. It's not. And oh, look, and also something else that I should say. Okay, I'm not saying that they shouldn't be allowed to do this. I'm not saying that, because there are people who are like, well, you know, every piece of media is on some level or another is propaganda. And I don't disagree. I think that people's values come out in what they create, especially artists. Their values come out. But I think that you can at least try to present something as fairly as possible, or people should be made aware that there might be more to the story. And I think to present an unnuanced, clearly biased view that may even have some untruths or leave out things or just outright lie, then while I don't think that they shouldn't be allowed to do it, I think that we should be able to respond to it, and we should be aware of it, because this is another example of an industry that was grown, it was created by, it was sustained by mostly white men. They made it, they created it, they invested into it, they spent money on it. And I have some data here that I want to bring up because this is important. Okay, so do you want to know how much we were spending in video games? How big the game industry is right now? So let me see, what do I have here? The numbers, we are at all close to, in 2017, something like $65.5 billion industry. All right. Video games is the largest entertainment industry of all time. The largest entertainment industry of all time in terms of how much money it makes. VR is projected to make way more than that. Right now, it's making $27 billion in 2018 is like what they're projecting. By 2022, this may not be true, but this is like a prediction. It's going to be at $209 billion. Okay? We're looking at an enormous industry. If they use it to influence people, then we should be aware of that. Because it is basically the same thing that happens with comics, with film, with television, with music, with everything else, with arts. There are people that want to use it to sell their narratives. And I'm not saying they can't, but I'm saying that we should be aware of it.
Well, let's look at this. First of all, school children shouldn't be exposed to narratives that haven't been vetted for historical accuracy, or vetted for an intent to pursue a particular agenda. And then the other thing is that the explosion in the VR industry is probably going to bring about its own new problems in terms of creating these environments of intense social cohesion that creates these groups of people that are highly polarized in their politics and in their thinking. You can see that happening now with just Discord and Twitter. I mean, can you imagine being able to walk, having an AR goggles on everywhere, and being able to walk, and everywhere you go, you have members of your community, which you used to have to log on to Discord and type to. You have members of your community talking to you and interacting with you everywhere, and it feels like they're right with you. That's going to create such a powerful sense of community within these political ideologies. So, and it's going to start, and lots of people are really isolated from their communities, from their families. So the people who are part of these ideologies are going to essentially be even more influential on them. So, I mean, the rise of echo chambers, this is going to be exponential for the rise of echo chambers. And we're going to have to, I think we're going to probably start having to really deal with how to prevent these augmented and VR echo chambers from creating groups of people who do not regard each other as human beings and refuse to coexist peaceably with them. And we're already seeing this now as groups of people are just from the technology that we have today, they're creating their own little moral ecosystems in which everybody outside of them is immoral. And they have these mythologized touchstone events like Cologne and Charlottesville that they've mythologized. And I don't mean looking at these events and seeing the parts of the events that aren't being reported accurately. I mean taking this event and saying, if you don't believe what I believe happened at this event exactly as I believe it, then you are part of the out group, and I can treat you in whatever way I want. And that's going to get worse the more these communities have a sense of cohesion and presence with each other. And like, I think that we are going to need to address that, because this is like everything that we see now with the problems with a lack of cohesion, a lack of regarding each other as human beings. Is that this is something that I see a lot on Twitter, and it's going to get worse as we have these environments of self-supporting political ideologies, people in these ideologies, these super echo chambers, quadruple echo chambers.
Yeah. The only problem with the whole, like, we shouldn't be doing this with children unless it's properly vetted, is that, and I skipped past this bit because I figured we would just bring it up because it's one of the things he mentions. This stuff is actually backed by people in public education. They are the professors and the teachers that are saying, yep, we're going to support what this guy's doing. We're going to put this out there. Which is ironic because he also simultaneously criticizes the public education system for not presenting this view, while getting support from people within the public education system for giving him the truth about our history. So they're backing this stuff, and that's the problem, because it's like they're the authority, unfortunately. So that this is a challenge. I got some super chats I want to get through here. Excuse me. The DCV Titan gives us $2 Canadian and says, I would like to know more. And
Would you like to know more?
Yes, he would. The French Honey Badger gives us $5 and says, I am poet. Hear me rhyme. Frank Tomeo gives us $2 Canadian and says, Alison and Doc do great work together. Thank you, man. Lloyd Gush gives us 10 R. I don't know what that is. Is that ruples? Are those rupees? Like from Legend of Zelda? 10 rupees. Hopefully he got them all from Bush's. Why does it seem like they take 1984 and Brave New World as inspiration and not cautionary tales? I don't know. The DCV Titan gives us $5 Canadian and says 65.5 billion. I'm willing to admit I'm $1,000 annually of that. That is in reference to how much we spent on video games last year, yeah. French Honey Badger gives us $5 and says everyone has an agenda. There is now I don't know what AY stands. Now way to elect facts of history to teach children. You should let parents decide what their children should learn. Yeah, well, we'd like to be able to do that. I'd be fine with that. If only there were 2 parents in the home. Frank Tomeo gives us $2 Canadian and says the mental gymnastics makes me want to hurl. Yeah. Brave New World, I read that in high school. I did not. Actually, the kind of like cautionary authoritarian communist stuff that you guys, we often talk about, 1984 and Animal Farm and stuff like that, I was not supposed to read in school, but we had like one of those great award-winning teachers that snuck in 1984 and Animal Farm, even the animated film for Animal Farm, and had us watch it. So I'm lucky. All right, so we're gonna go on to the next woke take to look at using holograms. So we're gonna take this shit deeper.
You showed me, I saw people with either their phones or tablets taking a picture of the subway map, and that there was Colin Kaepernick taking a knee protesting. What else is a part of this experience to be able to tell this larger story of this campaign?
Yeah, so anyone can download our app, Movers and Shakers AR, and you can see the first iteration is Colin Kaepernick, right? But like taking a step back, it's not exclusively about augmented reality for engagement. We are about new immersive technology in different ways. So the next protest that we're looking to do is a hologram protest. And the way that this will work is that we're going to have people 8 feet tall as holograms as slaves. And the idea is that these people would be in chains telling stories of traumatic experiences that have actually happened in the past. So, for example, a mother who was separated from her son because he was sold off in a slave auction, or someone who tried to run away from slavery and was beaten, whatever the case may be. That's the hologram aspect. And then the real aspect is that I'm looking to get together groups of, whether they were victims of police brutality or previously incarcerated people, sharing their story of injustice. And what we're looking to highlight through this juxtaposition of the ancestors and the real life is the fact that these issues still exist today in these different forms. And the solution is two-pronged, and that's the philosophy of our campaign. Number one, getting the history right so that we can elevate the collective consciousness so that Black and brown people are seen as humans and we're electing leaders that are not perpetuating these systems that I was mentioning before. And the other aspect is that these companies need to be held accountable, they need to pay for the damages, and we need to empower our own communities.
Okay.
Really, I think this is really about scapegoating white people, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
And also with the slavery, are we going to go back? How far are we going to go back? Are we going to go back to the fact that African tribes...
No, he's going to leave that out because...
that conducted warfare
Yeah.
and took each other as slaves, just like North America, like just like people in Europe did, just like people in Asia have done, just like every tribal group throughout human history has done. But we're not going to include that.
No. Well, he even leaves out, and this is something that I've seen a lot too, because I bring this up, when I get into these arguments online about this stuff. He leaves out the fact that she treats it like the Christopher Columbus thing, where slavery happened in a vacuum. It was just white people going to Africa, hunting people down and bringing them back in boats. And there is no mention of the fact that there were people in Africa before African tribes took over that drove them out, and African tribes, just like everywhere else in the world, they were warring with each other, and slaves in Africa and in the Middle East were often people from tribes that were conquered by other tribes. So they would conquer a tribe and then they would turn them into slaves. Okay. So when the slaves that we had here in the United States were members of tribes that were conquered by other African tribes in Africa and then sold to, Europeans, Middle Easterners, other Africans, whoever wanted to buy them. So this is not, first of all, it's not unique to Black people. Secondly, when you have to look at the history of who who did this, and thirdly, it's simply just the product of living in a time where everyone was fighting for resources without having let's say, as much of an enlightened understanding of the world as we do now. And I'm not saying that to be arrogant. I'm saying that it was in fact a different time, but it's not convenient to see things that way. It has to be, there has to be a narrative. That's what this is about. Raising the collective consciousness, making people feel like they can't escape from their past by making 8-foot-tall slaves as holograms that are telling anecdotal stories of terrible things that happened to them, which we cannot prove either way, but we just have to believe that they're true because we were told by this guy that they were.
Okay, so more fun facts from Wikipedia. This in particular was on the Arab slave trade, which might harken back to why the Spanish were a little upset with the Arabs or the people in the Middle East. Apparently, between 1 million and 1.25, 1.25 million Europeans were captured between the 16th and 19th century by Barbary corsairs, who were vassals of the Ottoman Empire and sold as slaves. These slaves were captured mainly from seaside villages from Italy, Spain, Portugal, and also from more distant places like France or England, the Netherlands, Ireland, even Iceland. They were also taken by pirates. The effects of these attacks were devastating. France, England, and Spain each lost thousands of ships. Long stretches of the Spanish and Italian coasts were almost completely abandoned by their inhabitants because of frequent pirate attacks. Pirate raids discouraged settlement along the coast until the 19th century. So perhaps this is why Columbus was slightly less than than thrilled. Well, I mean, the timing isn't quite right, but I'm pretty sure they probably were not didn't just start this in the 16th century. But regardless, you know, humans got a human, it seems. And part of that is treating like the outsiders as a source of cheap labor.
Pretty much. I mean, you know, again, it's like it's taking stuff that happened in the past, which clearly it's like, how do you measure the morality of 3, 4 centuries ago, 5 centuries ago? How do you do it? And I don't know how. We have our accounts of things, but we do know humans today, and we know that we're messy people. I mean, he's talking about, let me just put it this way. He's talking about all of the shit that happened 300 years ago with slaves in the United States, because that's how he has to frame it. It's just the U.S., like it happened in a bubble, and nothing happened before the settlers came, and nothing happened in other parts of the world before the slaves came. It's just what happened in this country. I'll tell you what happened, all right? Just make it brief. Less than 5% of people in the United States own slaves. Less than 5%. Most of them could not afford more than like a couple. So you're looking at essentially an argument against the 1% in the South. They were expensive. You had to house them. You had to feed them. You had to keep them healthy. Otherwise, they're not really, you know, going to produce as much, okay? I'm not saying that any of this is okay, but it was never really an efficient way of doing things in the first place. Secondly, blacks weren't the only people that were slaves. There were also people that were indentured servants, like the Irish and the Italians, okay? Thirdly, black people also owned property and also owned slaves. There were some who did. It wasn't a large number, but it did happen. Then you have to consider where they came from and what slavery was like in those places. And I'm telling you, it was way more brutal in the Middle East, and it was way more brutal in Africa. And there were probably some African slaves that were happy to get over to the Americas compared to where they were. Okay, so this is just not that simple of an issue. Then, oh shit, I lost it. I was gonna say there's something about other parts of the world but it doesn't really matter at this point. I'm just saying that this is not that simple, and it's just being made this way. Yeah, there was castration in the Middle East so that slaves wouldn't be able to make descendants, and therefore, you know.
I wanted to save more of the discussion of the African slave trade, or the Arab slave trade, for when he starts talking about Muslims.
Yeah.
So
I think
let's
he makes
listen to a little more.
Yeah, well, he makes a mention of that before, but I think it comes up again later, and we'll definitely get into that. Okay, so next woke take is about VR and AR using it to take back the narrative, i.e. retell it.
Right? And it's handled properly. What many people don't know is that there are Jewish families who received reparations for those damages. Over a 6-year period, Jewish families have received about $89 billion of reparations in that regard. And I'm not even calling for 40 acres and a mule. I've already outlined my plan in terms of how I want community justice and how I want it to look. But then if we're translating that in terms of the importance of acknowledging our history in the United States, even here, I think it's amazing that there are Jewish organizations that make sure that every student knows about the atrocities that have occurred during the Holocaust. But most people do not know about the African Holocaust. Most people do not know that 80 to 100 million indigenous people were killed across 2 continents as a result of a mass genocide. And it is this lack of context and nuance that contributes to this collective consciousness that dehumanizes.
That's ironic that he says it's this lack of nuance. I just had to pause there because he brings that up multiple times. Like, yeah, there isn't enough nuance. Oh, there isn't, is there?
As black and brown people. And so it's a lot of these issues that we face today are a result of the institutional ownership of those narratives. So it's time for black and brown people to take those narratives back. And I think the utilization of virtual and augmented reality will inspire people to do so.
All right. Let's go. I don't know if you want to say anything to that. Oh, I got some super chats, but I don't know if you wanted to say anything to that bit.
So essentially, Okay, so there's a history of genocide so is this all connected? This still connected to Columbus?
He was comparing Columbus to Hitler because that's what you do in 2018 is you try to figure out how many degrees a person is away from Hitler. And the reason why he's doing it, that's why he brings up how the Jews were given reparations by Germany after the Holocaust, and that Germany is handling things a lot better than the U.S. is in terms of... Go on.
The people who were involved in that, many of them were still alive when the reparations occurred. So you're talking about actual individuals that can be identified. So you're talking about individual victims who can be identified and individual perpetrators who can be identified and held individually responsible. This is categorically different than the group guilt that he's describing here. And also, slavery was not brown and black. It was every single color every human being comes in. Mm-hmm. The slaves in the Roman Empire were mostly, they were mostly actually Italians. They're mostly from the Latins, but they were also Northern Europeans, Southern Europeans, people from Spain.
People they conquered, basically. Germania and stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly. And that was how, like, in the past, that's just how you got slaves. You essentially conquered that tribe over there, and you either killed off all the men or you took some likely ones to do your labor, and you took the women for servants and possibly concubines. That's what you did. That's what they were doing in Africa. That's what they were doing in Europe. That was what they were doing in North America, if Columbus is to be believed, and I think he probably was being honest. You know, that's what people do in a tribal system. They conquer the tribe over there, and then they take what they want as slaves. They take the people that they want as slaves. Yep. That's the effect of a tribal system. So slavery does not have a skin color. Okay.
All right. So this is the next hot woke take, rather. More about the goals of VR and AR. So we'll go on with that.
And what is your model of this truth and reconciliation process? And how do you see this recasting of the narratives is going to kind of propagate at these different scales?
That really, it really worries me when they say recasting the narratives, retelling the narratives, taking hold of it. It's just, it's so concerning. It's basically how do we lie and make it look like the truth to get people to do what we want? That's the bit that really concerns me.
And reconciliation, that's really interesting. Reconciliation, so this activity that you're engaging in, isolating a single group of people for blame, for collective guilt, is about reconciling. I guess it's reconciling with your version of the past. Okay, all right.
All right, moving on.
When you deal with issues that span many different generations, there's a certain amount of like, well, this is something my ancestors did, so I'm not culpable, so I don't need to think about it. And I think there's costs to having that type of mindset. But with that, like, how do each of us sort of recognize either the shame that's associated with something that comes from something that someone else did, but also there's the impact on the Black and brown people who are living with those consequences. And so there's this dimension of empathy that is required to be able to listen to these stories and integrate it within maybe reevaluating the cognitive dissonance of their own mythology that may be built on this lie that could be that we could escape our history. And so
hold on a second. I think I'm in the wrong position here because I'm like, wait, doesn't sound right. Hold on.
That sounds actually, that's the presenter. And I think what he's saying is how do we, I don't know what he's saying. He seems to be talking about white people grappling with this collective guilt about things that they didn't do individually.
Yeah, he's asking him something else, but I had to jump ahead a little bit. This is really what I wanted to play. I'm sorry, guys.
Now, in terms of my vision for what I would like for myself as an individual and Movers and Shakers as a group to do, there are several. So in terms of our augmented reality content, we want to get a New York City contract to put our augmented reality in Columbus Circle so that any New Yorker can download the app for free and see the truth. So that's the first thing. Number two, in terms of our augmented reality content, these installations can live as a book. We're partnered with a school in the Bronx right now where we're going through an 11th grade curriculum and seeing how we can integrate it into curriculum. We want to see how the students engage with the augmented reality, and we want to make it better and scale out. It's not.
So the 11th grade, that's a junior in high school. So this is like at least how early they want to start this at.
Not just about Columbus. I want everyone to know about Toussaint Louverture. I think it's important for people to know about Simon Bolivar. I think it's important for people to know about Madam C.J. Walker and other stories that are not traditionally told in the textbooks and the curricula, so that there's a broader context and understanding.
Those people that he mentioned, isn't Simone de Beauvoir? She's like a feminist poet or something like that.
Yeah, she's a feminist writer.
Yeah, I don't know about the other ones, but yeah, and also, you know, for some context why that matters. This guy is an avid supporter of Black Lives Matter, and I didn't take a Black Lives Matter clip because I mean they do ask him how he feels about it, and he goes into this long, diatribe about how important it is and how Black Lives Matter is so important because of black men getting killed. But let me show you this, and I brought this up before about Black Lives Matter, but I'm going to show you because this is this has to be known. All right, this is the thing about, I'm on blacklivesmatter.com/about. So this is what they're about. All right. Black Lives Matter Global Network is a chapter-based, member-led organization whose mission is to build local power and to intervene in violence inflicted on black communities by the state and vigilantes. We are expansive. We are a collective of liberators who believe in an inclusive and spacious movement. We also believe that in order to win and bring as many people with us along the way, we must move beyond the narrow nationalism that is all too prevalent in black communities. We must ensure that we are building a movement that brings all of us to the front. We affirm the lives of black queer and trans folks, disabled folks, undocumented folks, folks with records, women, and all black lives along the gender spectrum. Notice, they leave out men. They're not talking about men. And men are the ones that died, and men are the ones that made this happen. Male deaths are the ones that made this happen. And that's before we get into whether or not any of that stuff is legitimately something that you should start a movement over, considering, you know, when you look at the facts about each case that has been used to essentially launch Black Lives Matter into our sort of mainstream discussion around these issues, right? It's a feminist organization. Absolutely. We're working for a world where black lives are no longer systematically targeted for demise. We affirm a humanity in our contributions to society and our resilience in the face of deadly oppression. The call for Black Lives to Matter is a rallying cry for all black lives striving for liberation. But the ones getting killed are the men, right? The men are just a tool. Black Lives Matter doesn't care about the men, only insofar as they're useful to their narrative. At the end of the day, it's a feminist organization. It's an intersectional feminist organization specifically.
Yeah, it's a pipeline.
Yeah.
That's what you're seeing there is one end of the pipeline that sucks the victimhood up intersectional feminists and lands it in the camps of politically powerful and influential women, which generally are white. So this is the pipeline sucking it up.
Yeah.
And of course they're going to say, no, they're not going to include men in that. And I wonder if black men ever really noticed that somehow in this intersectional victim narrative, their manhood disappears. And do they make the connection between their manhood disappearing on a website that's supposed to be devoted to black men being killed, disproportionately killed, and then suddenly their manhood do they make the connection between that and adult forms of masculinity, adult men disappearing from their communities? Because there's a connection to be made there, and that connection is black men are not useful to the victimhood narrative. So they must be removed. They must be removed from their families. They must be removed from their communities. They must be removed from their own movements in order for this victimhood to become useful to the intersectional pipeline. As it goes up, they're refined out of it because they're not useful. Mm-hmm. Their story is not useful. And furthermore, the people who are doing this, who are extracting this political power from the black community through these victimhood narratives of the black community, and in the process of extracting, actually refines the victimhood, refines the men out of the black community. Because the most valuable victimhood commodity is, of course, a whole bunch of single mothers who have nobody to protect and provide for them, and we must do something for them. That is the most valuable victim resource to go up the pipeline. So in extracting the victim resource, you have to process away the masculinity, the manhood, the black men from the community. Process them away, get them out of there. And then they'll turn around and look at the symptoms of doing that to a community and say that that is actually caused by slavery or Jim Crow, rather than the process of taking a community, any community, and you could do this with any community, it doesn't have to be black. You do this with a poor white community or a wealthy white community, whatever. It's the process of taking that community and extracting its victimhood resources from it. And that process is what's causing these symptoms in that community. And then the people who are doing that process will turn around and say their very own activities are evidence that they need to be in there, first of all, and evidence that the whole community is being oppressed by someone else or some other group. And it's like, let me put it really simply. If you have two groups of men, one that's told that under no circumstance is there anything impeding that kind of masculine identity, which is any circumstance that you're in, you can overcome it through your own effort and provide and protect for those who rely on you. That's the ultimate masculine essence. And we can argue about it being an identity versus being innate. I would say it's innate to men. But if you take two groups of men and you say to one, your masculinity can overcome anything, and you say to the other, well, you're a black man, your masculinity is, no, it's not going to do it. Sorry. What do you think the relative achievement of both groups of men are going to be? Just from that alone. So, and then you turn around, and as you have extracted adult black men from their communities and extracted adult, mature black masculinity from their communities, you turn around and you look at the industrial hellscape you've left behind, and you point to slavery and Jim Crow rather than your own activities as an intersectional feminist. I hope that if you're listening, like, again, if I've confused you, please put a comment. I know the last time I talked about this, there was somebody, a black man on Twitter, who said, you are racist because you're saying that that violence in the black community is a result of removing black men from their communities in order to make them more useful as victimhood fodder. And I asked him to give me a time code, but he never replied. But anyway, if you have any concerns about what I'm saying, just ask in the comments below. I'll be happy to talk about it, or to at least incorporate your concerns the next time I talk about it. Did you understand what I was getting at, Brian?
Yeah, I did. And I want to also add that, you know, they're not actually hiding it that much anymore. There's websites like The Root and like other feminist websites, specifically supposedly black, sort of pro-black websites that attack black men. There's an article on The Root.com that literally says black men are the white people of black people. So they have they're out of grace. They've fallen out of grace just like gay men have. And you know, I don't know if you noticed, but with all the groups that are falling out of grace, even trans men are starting to fall. And what I mean is trans men who became women. So I guess that's trans women have fallen out of grace to some extent. I don't know if you noticed that there's a constant between all of that. You know, that it's men. At the end of the day, it's men that are falling out of grace. So
yes.
And they're not useful. It's like you said. They're
Oh, I remember what he said. He said that because there's high rates of, I was proposing that a lot of the police violence is actually due to a high rate of violence in black communities. And that itself was a symptom of disenfranchisement, because they don't have the influence of adult black masculinity anymore. They don't have it. They don't have that resource anymore. So you're seeing more gang violence. You're seeing more young men getting even more violent. And as a response, you're going to see the police getting more violent to the community. But because I presented that was a racist interpretation, even though I said that the violence itself is a symptom of systematic disenfranchisement of the black community by removing their fathers and adult male mentors. It's
Yeah.
a systematic disenfranchisement of a community by removing its masculinity.
Absolutely.
But that's verboten.
But yeah,
And I
that's
asked the
racism.
time-
The other thing is that for further
Well, what
evidence
if I'm
of
right?
Well, you're
Like, what if
probably
I'm
right.
right?
You're probably right. But I'm saying
Like, what if-
it's Go ahead.
Do these people ever consider that? Like, what if I am actually right? And if the reason why black communities are suffering as much as they are is because black men have been targeted for removal.
Well, they
and
have.
black masculinity has been targeted for removal.
Yes,
And that's why all of this shit is happening.
That's exactly why this is happening, though. It's because there's no fathers. I live in and grew up in black neighborhoods, predominantly black neighborhoods. I live in Humboldt Park now. I grew up here. I was born in the hospital up the street. And my neighborhoods have always been majority black, and then Hispanics come second. And it's basically across both, okay? We've always had a problem with absent fathers. And as a result, we've had a problem with gang violence. And as a result, we had a problem with teen pregnancy. All right? And I also went to high school on the east side of Chicago, sort of north, near a project called Cabrini Green. Look it up. Cabrini, C-A-B-R-I-N-I, green, like the color. That, at the time, which was in the late 80s, early 90s, was the toughest project in the whole city. It was, nobody wanted to go there, okay? Dominated by black people, population-wise. No fathers. Like, no fathers, lots of teen mothers, lots of people like living, below the poverty line. There is a lot of men that were growing up there, raised by their peers and raised by single mothers and raised by race-baiting preachers in all of these neighborhoods to be essentially feminine-minded people in male bodies that would use violence to get what they wanted because that was what was done to them, because they were more likely to get beaten. And the same thing applies to the Latinos that lived in the neighborhoods with me. We were afraid of our mothers. We didn't know our fathers. I was one of the exceptions. My father was with me for most of my life, and I'm grateful for that. But this whole thing is not an accident. Like, the black men and Hispanic men are the canaries in the coal mine. Those communities are the canaries in the coal mine for what's happening everywhere. And it has a lot to do with taking masculinity out and what happens as a result. And what these people that are, and the thing is, the really convenient distraction that intersectional feminism happens to bring to the table is that the problems that are being faced by those communities don't have anything to do with the men being missing. It's actually the men's fault. How convenient is that? And not only is it the men's fault, but the women are actually the bigger victims. And there are videos you can find. I saw there was a viral video. Sorry, my computer is trying to give me an update. Fucking Windows 10. There was a viral video that was going around that you can still watch, where this guy talks about Black Lives Matter and how women are the biggest victims of it. And they actually are killed by police more often. And they are the ones that suffer more. I know it's completely ridiculous, but that's what he does. And I'm like, you're literally erasing the men who are dying, whether they deserve to or not, specifically so you can make the women the bigger victims. This is not a good organization. Not a good organization. They do not care about the black community. They do not care about black men, and they especially don't care about men in general. And they don't even identify the problem for what it is. They literally will distract you from anything else except what the real problem is. This is why when conservatives that are like black conservatives like Larry Elder or Thomas Sowell or whoever, they make the case that, or Jesse Lee Peterson has done this, they make the case that the problem is that there are no black fathers in the home, or masculinity is missing, is absent, okay? And Black Lives Matter will say that's a distraction. We are trying to work on that. You're just trying to distract us from the real problem, which is police, it's whiteness, it's men, it's all of these things, it's testosterone, it's whatever, okay? So even no matter what you feel about these guys, they're trying to put their finger on the pulse of what the problem is. So
Well,
this
yeah.
is yeah.
Well, and then I would agree with them wholeheartedly. The problems with the communities that we're talking about is it's a loss of black men. Like, they're valuable. Black men are valuable. They should be valued and respected as an important part of their communities. And yet we have these groups that have specifically targeted them for removal through their policies and their social experiments.
Mm-hmm.
And they've also specifically targeted black masculinity as something that is inferior to white masculinity, which is actually, if you think about it, sort of gross. Because what they're saying, when they're saying that being black, as a black man, you're incapable of overcoming your blackness through manhood itself, is being able to recognize the situation, be part of the situation, but turn it around. You're saying that you will always be a victim of being black. And then white men don't have that. And apparently Asian men don't have it either. They're fine as well. But it's just black men. Black men who cannot overcome their race by being a man, by taking charge, by being responsible, by providing and protecting. They're not capable of it. White and Asian men, they're capable of it, but not black men. I mean, do you see how that freaking... Well, personally, I can only interpret that. I would find that insulting.
No, it is insulting. No. You can find it insulting. Just put yourself in the shoes. It's fine. Like, it is. It's fucking...
but I can't do that because, you know...
Oh, yeah. You're not qualified to do that. I will do it. I can, a third of me can do it. A third of me can do it. Yeah, let's play that game. But let me see. I got some super chats here. And also, does anybody know how to use Windows 10? Windows 10 is trying to tell me that it's going to start an update at like 5:30, and I clicked to change the time, and then the window just disappeared. So I don't want it to try to update, because if it does that, I might drop or something. I don't want that to happen. So I got like 10 minutes or so, 15 minutes. All right, so let me look at some super chats here. Let's see. French Honey Badger says, Free to Choose Network debunked the idea of people being in echo chambers. People who follow news online are exposed to more points of view than before. Okay. Frank Tomeo gives us $5 Canadian and says, you can't even compare athletes in the same league from 30 years ago. These people don't think. Yeah. French Honey Badger says, he said Simone Bolivar, Venezuelan revolutionary. Oh, okay, I got them mixed up. Not Simone de Beauvoir. Okay, so a Venezuelan revolutionary? Do you mean a communist? Wise Mage Zero gives us $5 Canadian and says, the other day I heard a song that made me think of Alison. Women Are the Niggers of the World by John Lennon. I didn't make that up, by the way. No, that's a real song. I've heard it.
Oh, fuck you.
Yeah,
no, I'm so fucking sick of white knights deriding women's ability to influence the world and change it for the better or the worse. Like, I'm sick of it. Like, it's just, no, stop it. I mean, insofar as I can sort of relate to what I was saying to Brian about how apparently white and Asian masculinity is more potent than black masculinity because black men are eternal victims of being black. Well, it's sort of the same thing, except, you know, at least with women, we can rely on our innate value. But in my case, I'm like, yeah, I don't want to do that either. I'd rather see myself as having an effective presence in the world and being able to create positive change, and being told crap like women are the niggers of the world. It's like, nope, do not want. No, that is not flattering. It's not, you know, making me out to be more of a victim and not a co-creator of society with men is not what I want. I don't want it. Keep walking along, Lennon. Keep going.
Yeah. No, John Lennon is he was a giant poof. So Frank Tomeo gives us another $2 Canadian. Thank you, Frank. And he writes, Brian is great with mental gymnastics. Send booze. Are you saying that I'm engaging in mental gymnastics, or I'm good at identifying other people's mental gymnastics? Because I'm not trying to dance around anything. If I'm wrong, let me know.
Maybe you're actually interpreting my mental gymnastics. Maybe my conversation. My commentary is more like mental interpretive dance.
Yeah. That.
Yeah.
Okay, I found a way to change it so it's not gonna happen until 8:30 p.m. Shit. Boom. So thank you to Zeranx, I think it was, to change that for me, because I don't want to deal with that shit. All right, and Duck, formerly known as Censor, gives us $2 Australian, and he says augmented reality rarity porn when? It's probably already being developed as we speak. French Honey Badger gives us $5 and says Chavez and Maduro love to talk about Bolivar. In fact, the Venezuelan currency is called Bolivar. Venezuelan currency. Yeah. I wonder what their word for food is. Okay, so anyway, let us move on to the next hot take.
That's right! That's right! That's right!
That will be at, let's see. Oh, yeah, moderates, white supremacy, and what MAGA really means to him.
Yeah, and as I look at dimensions of power and economics, there's the concept of a power law dynamic, meaning that, you know, once you have access to power and privilege, then you have like an exponentially increasing amount of opportunities for more power and privilege. And if the history of America is built on the backs of slavery, then there's a bit of actively pushing an entire class of people down with both the African Americans and the...
I want to flip the table in this room where they're at. Just run in and flip the table. That's serious. You know what? This guy, by the way, this really oppressed Black Lives Matter guy who is the CEO of his own company and he works at the Huffington Post. He's also a graduate at a university. This guy is fucking privileged as shit, by the way. So
I bet his company pulls down a hell of a lot more than we do.
Absolutely he does. No, actually, wait. I went to his Patreon. No, it wasn't his Patreon. I went to the Patreon for the VR podcast. They're not doing not doing as well as we are. So there is that. But yes.
No, but they're generic. Like the thing is that I don't want to get too much into like, oh my God, this guy who's the presenter is a bad guy. I think that he's just sort of generic liberal. Might be. He might be crazy. I don't know. Leftist, just generic leftists, sort of suffering from the same kind of tribalism as the other side. Mm-hmm. And you know, so it's like, I don't want to get caught up in being too I don't know, nasty to him.
I think I'll be a little bit nasty to him though.
Okay, you can be as nasty as you want.
I'm entitled because I'm brown and I can be nasty. So, but I think he's probably a product of the system, if anything, because he's got lots of degrees. So he went to university. And he was probably
I'm not talking about his guest. His guest.
Oh, you're talking about the guy doing the podcast? Yeah. He's one of those guilty moderates like that this guy's gonna speak to. That's what that is. Yeah. No, the guest is the person I'm talking about. He's one of the he's one of the white guilt moderates. He's like, you ever seen that new meme?
You could be as nasty as you want to the guest.
Yeah.
Because to be quite frank, I'm not seeing a hell of a lot of difference between him and the people he calls Nazis. I mean, genuinely Nazis, the ones who want to kill the inferior races and do that kind of thing. I'm not really seeing that much difference, except he's in a different part of his, 4-stage plan.
You know what? Let's put this in another context, because I want to try and make this point from a principled perspective, because that's how I see it, okay? Well, I am going after this guy a bit in this because he's using technology that to essentially control people. Or at least he believes that is what it has the potential to do. So he finds it's useful for those reasons. And I find that to be pretty despicable. Just like ideologically speaking, he's like, oh, VR and AR can control people. I want to control people because I need to control people to get them to do the things that I want. And ultimately, by the way, this does result in him wanting to redistribute wealth, which I didn't take as one of the hot takes because I figured it was already, but you can like watch it yourself. They basically say it in the beginning, So
he wants reparations.
He wants reparations, but he wants to redistribute wealth. It's not just like 40 acres and a mule. He did say that already. He wants it to be spread out so that everybody's equal. He's going after the 1% and also white people and men because reasons. So there is definitely something nefarious.
Does he not see the conflict of interest?
No, he thinks that he's gonna be safe from this, but this is the reason why I bring this up. Okay, if you have trouble understanding why this could be a problem because your politics may fall closer in line with this, let's change it. Imagine there was an open Klansman on this same podcast, and he also wanted to use VR and AR to retell history in his image. And he wanted to change people's minds in the way that he thinks is best. That to reinforce ideas, I don't know, about an ethno-state or kicking out all of the black and brown people or whatever. But my point is, if you have anybody in that seat and they're talking about re-engineering our society for a vision that they have based on ideas and a victimhood complex that they own, right? That they believe is true, then I can't see how you wouldn't find it despicable no matter what, right? No matter who's sitting there talking about it. So I'm just saying in this context, it's a problem. But if it was like a fucking, David Duke type, I mean, I don't know if David Duke is still that way, but like that type of guy, or some kind of like imam that wanted to use VR and AR to promote Sharia, or if it was some kind of like guy from the Westboro Baptist Church that wanted to use VR and AR to like, do whatever it is that cult of people wants to do, or whatever. I think that there should be reason for alarm, or at the very least, a reason to be aware that this stuff is happening.
Well, let me put it this way. This man disqualifies himself from talking about the narrative, the simple fact that he recognizes no legitimate opposition. So I don't know if you included this in his hot takes, but he talked about trying to talk to the people at Charlottesville.
Yeah,
because,
I
he
do.
Didn't want to be part of an echo chamber.
Yeah, I do have that.
Okay, then let's listen to it.
All right.
Is it the next one?
It's a little before that, so let's see. Yeah, he does say I didn't bother talking to him because I was scared, which is kind of bullshit. But here we go.
At the end of the day, we are not equal. We want to say that Black Lives Matter too.
Yeah, and you also have this 360 video where you actually
then
went down to
Charlottesville,
Charlottesville,
Black Lives
Virginia.
Matter too.
Right. It's not about that.
Yeah, where there was these protests from the alt-right that were trying to preserve these Confederate statues. And so maybe you could talk a bit about the story in the context of what motivated and inspired you to actually be there for that protest and to document it with the 360 video.
Yeah, so I'm working on a documentary with a couple friends from college. It's called We the People VR. And it's covering activism in the age of Trump. It started when I went down to protest the inauguration of Trump. I put myself in chains and I wore a sign that said property of Trump and his friends in the 1%. And I noticed, whether it's the ACLU gaining 5 times their annual income in terms of donations in the first weekend of Trump, or, the millions of people that came out in the Women's March, this is not an average time. So I thought there would be value into capturing this time that will be studied in the future through the medium of the future. And so through it, we went to Muslim American Solidarity marches, went to White Lives Matter.
All right. Muslim Solidarity marches. Okay. I'm going to point something out. This is again from Wikipedia, which means that if it has any kind of slant, it's a leftist or liberal slant. And this is from the history of the Arab slave trade. And I know that there's some contention on the name, but regardless, the Arab trade of Zanji, Bantu slaves in Southeast Africa, is one of the oldest slave trades, predating the European transatlantic slave trade by 700 years. Male slaves were often forced to work as servants, soldiers, or laborers by their owners, while female slaves, including those from Africa, were long traded to the Middle East and countries and kingdoms by Arab and Oriental traders as concubines and servants. Arab, African, and Oriental traders were involved in the capture and transports of slaves northward across the Sahara Desert and the Indian Ocean into the Middle East, Persia, and the Far East. From the 7th century till around the 1960s, the Arab slave trade continued in one form or another. All right, so the Arab slave trade, the Muslim slave trade pre-existed the European transatlantic slave trade by 700 years. Okay? And you are
Wow.
and this individual is proposing a strategic alliance with Muslims and proposing to make people like myself, who was never, like, I was a Dutch peasant. My ancestry is Dutch peasantry. I'm a descendant of a long line of Dutch cookie makers. And on my mother's side, French voyageurs. So while all of this was happening, they were probably kicking around in northern Ontario with the beaver. So I had nothing to do with any of this. But he wants to make a strategic alliance with Muslims who also had nothing to do with the Arab slave trade, by the way. But this is it's starting to feel extremely arbitrary, in the extreme. Because if you're going to start to propose historical group guilt on groups of people, it does not make it doesn't make any sense to ascribe more historical group guilt to white people in North America and none to Arabs in the Middle East. It doesn't make any, it's completely arbitrary, considering that their slave trade was longer and more brutal.
Yeah, it's selective. Actually, it ended in the 1960s, apparently.
Yep.
It was and like, there are still parts of Africa and the Middle East that still have slaves now.
And effective slavery.
Now.
They have indentured servitude.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you look at Oman or Dubai, a lot of Dubai was built by these migrant laborers who were treated basically like slaves. And I grew up in Saudi Arabia. That is the most racist society I have ever seen in my life. I've traveled across southern and northern Europe, UK. I've traveled in Asia, and I've gone to Egypt, and I've lived in North America. Saudi Arabia is the most racist society I have ever seen. I know someone personally, a young man who wanted to marry a mixed race girl in Saudi Arabia, and his father threatened him with death for even suggesting it. So this is a really racist society. And incidentally, the girl was, I believe, partially black, or from another region. She was part black.
Mm-hmm.
And his father was going to kill him for even suggesting it. It's an extremely racist society, and they do not like black people. And yet right now they don't like them.
Yep.
And they have a caste system in Saudi Arabia, with Pakistanis on the bottom, Pakistanis and Indians from the subcontinent India on the bottom, and then the Filipinos are above them, and then the Westerners, and so on. And then the native born Arabs are above the Westerners. But it's a caste system. Like, this is not, this entire region is not. Okay, you get rid of us, the white people who are the moderates. You guys go enjoy each other's company. You see how long that strategic alliance will last.
Yeah, good luck with that.
Good luck with that.
Yes, absolutely.
And hell, I mean, if you get rid of the moderate Muslims and who are like shaking their head at this nonsense, or the moderate black people who are shaking their head at this nonsense, which you would probably consider to be race and religious traitors. You probably think that Brian's a race traitor. And you get rid of those people. You get rid of all of the moderates who are like, you know what? We just want to have a stable society where people just respect each other. We're not interested in reparations. We know that these bad things happened in the past. We don't want to repeat them. Okay, that's the main thing here. We do not want to repeat them. Okay? That's what the moderates don't want. We don't want a repetition of this. Mm-hmm. And you want to get rid of all of us, and you want to discuss terms. You want to discuss your strategic alliance with no moderates, just with extremist Muslims like yourself. I mean, you're not an extremist Muslim, but you are extreme in your racial rhetoric, and in ascribing collective guilt to people who had absolutely nothing to do with what you're considering them to be guilty of. Yep. Okay. All right. Done.
All right. Let me look at the super chats. And by the way, I've already been called race traitor by other Puerto Ricans. I don't really get along with them, but it's not because I don't want to. All right, so.
Well, I now get called it too. So.
Of course.
Race traitor friendship go something.
Yeah. You're a gender traitor. That's worse, I think. Abstract Concrete gives us 25 planes. PLN. I don't know what that is, but thank you for that. He writes, I believe that BLM or feminists do what they do out of best intentions. Their failures are emergent from their ideologies they treat as religions. I think it's a bit of the people at the top and a lot of the people with a decent amount of authority. They actually don't have best intentions. They have a revenge-focused mindset. They think of this whole thing as a struggle for power, and that they are owed something. It's actually coming from entitlement. And then there are a lot of people that don't really look into it much. They hear the sentiment that feminists puts out there. They hear the sentiments that BLM puts out there. And they think, well, that doesn't sound unreasonable, so I'll go along with that. And they don't question it. Those people are like the well-intended ones. But I think that there's the people that matter, they actually are, it's like communists. Like, communists claim that the reason why we need to make things more equal is because they care about the poor, but they don't. They actually just really, really hate the rich. And there's a big difference between really caring about the people that you supposedly want to take care of and just utterly despising the people that have something that you think you are owed or you feel that they took from you. There's a big difference between those two things. So I get where you're coming from. I think that there's a large number that do have the best intentions, and but they just don't look into it much. But I think it's important to know that there are people that actually don't have good intentions. Frank Tomeo gives us $2 Canadian and says, "Be as frank as you want, Allison," who is not here right now. And then Josh O gives us $5 and says, "It's not tyranny when I do it." That's right. All right. So we're going to continue the rest of this sound clip. Allison, it's like 5:42. How much further do you want to go?
I just wanted to point out that he talks about him trying to break apart from the echo chamber at Charlottesville.
Yeah,
but
that's the clip that I'm in the middle of, but go on.
All right, let's continue that.
Okay.
I don't know how much more we're going to be able to get done because
this
is
that's all right.
Really
we got through many of the main points.
Yeah, we're
Rally
probably
in
just repeating ourselves.
Yeah, maybe.
Murfreesboro, Tennessee, the Women's March, and Charlottesville. And Charlottesville itself was unlike any protest I've ever been to. What most people do not realize is that it was worse the night before. The night before, I was in a church. It was a multicultural church service, and Klansmen were outside with torches.
No, not Klansmen. No, that's not. I'm sorry, but I'm not defending the alt-right here, but it's not what he's saying it is. There were a large number of people that genuinely cared about what was happening with the statues and freedom of expression, and then mixed within them were some Klansmen, but there probably weren't very many.
And I remember asking the ushers, "Is the church fireproof?" There was no answer. "Do you have a backup plan?" There was no answer. And so we were sitting ducks. And I remember texting my friends that night about what was going on and thinking about how the people in Aleppo, Syria were sending out tweets kind of like as a digital memorial for what was about to go on as the tanks were approaching the city. I felt the same way. I felt like a sitting duck. And in that moment, I really thought I was going to die. And I remember hearing another black woman in the church saying, "This is what our ancestors went through." And
by the way, this is all a really moving story that could probably be on like Lifetime or the Oxygen Network. They never burned the church down. Nothing like that ever happened. So he felt afraid, but nothing happened. He was safe. They didn't kill anybody.
So this is entirely comparable to having tanks.
Yeah, it's the same.
No, it isn't.
Womp womp.
Tiki torches are not comparable to. It's...
That there and that
Okay.
it makes me think about like, is there a mentality that you have to have, and this is something that feminists do with the rape culture thing, where they say, well, I was walking home from my university, and there was a guy that followed me almost all the way to my room, or all the way to my dorm or something, and it's like, and I felt scared and I thought he was going to rape me. When in actual fact, the guy was he happened to be going in the same direction that you were going. And because his dorm was around there or whatever. And so, like, why are we, this is exactly the same thing. He's like, oh, there are Klansmen outside. No, there were people outside who happened to be white, and they were, you know, making a statement for their little protest, and you decided to internalize that and make it about you and how you were a victim. Although nobody was victimized, not the night before. It didn't actually get heated until the next day, and that's because Antifa showed up armed to the teeth and ready to start a fight.
By the way, did the church have fire exits?
It probably did, but he doesn't mention that. He just said, do we have...
Well, it's really interesting, because if you asked an usher in any kind of public establishment, what happens if there's fire, he would probably point the fire exits.
Yeah, there probably
unless
are.
The church isn't up to code.
Yeah, unless the church isn't up to code, because they probably would have that. So yeah. So I'm gonna jump. I think it must be the next bit where he talks about approaching the alt-right or whatever. But let's keep going.
Eventually, like in short little spurts, we snuck out and we made it to safety.
Nothing happened.
We were shaken up, but I remember her saying that this is what our ancestors went through. And that kind of emboldened me the next day, and I didn't feel scared anymore. Because at the end of the day, this was nothing compared to the lynchings, the intimidation in terms of people burning crosses or putting firebombs in houses. If you were born in the wrong area and you happened to have the wrong complexion, this was daily life for some people.
Yeah,
and the fact that it's re-emerging in 2018.
Yeah. Just no, they happen to have torches, so what?
Scene is deplorable. And so the next day I knew I was going to be walking into a war zone for various reasons. One of the people in the group that I was with left about an hour earlier, came back with staples in his head because he was beat by the white supremacists. As I walked into this war zone, it was clear that they prepared for it. They were arranged with shields and in a Spartan phalanx. And
that part is partly true. There were people there with shields, but they were expecting Antifa, and that's why they had shields specifically to defend themselves from attacks, because that had been going on already all over the country. You know, ever since the election, Antifa was attacking people that wore the wrong hat in public. So it would make sense that these people at this free speech rally would want to defend themselves in advance. And the fact is, if Antifa had not shown up at Charlottesville, no one would have been hurt. They would have just done their thing and left. And we've had neo-Nazis and Klansmen and free speech advocates and all kinds of people all over the spectrum having various protests. The Occupy Wall Street, the Tea Partiers, whatever it is that you feel about whatever. And most of the time, there's no violence. And the reason is because nobody shows up. You know, like you have to like request a license to be there, and
nobody used to care.
Yeah, we didn't. Well, I mean, like, nobody liked the Klan. Like, very few people. They're like a couple. I think there's like a couple thousand Klan members left. They have no power at this point. They're nobody.
And nobody cared.
And nobody cared. And that was actually how it was. That was how it should have been, where you have people, because we live in a free country and we allow freedom of assembly and we allow people to express themselves, that they should be able to do it. And when it comes to the people that you definitely disagree with, right, in terms of you find them deplorable, like the Westboro Baptist Church is a family of like 30 people or something, right? They should be allowed to assemble and do all that shit, but if you take them too seriously, you're giving them too much credibility. So most people just don't care. It's like, so what? But the problem is that when you do, and you try to take a stand and become aggressive and violent, then you create problems. Antifa created problems. And the media, and the mainstream media, and the late night talk show hosts like Trevor Noah and stuff, and all these other people with the large platforms, they defended Antifa. They said it stands for anti-fascist, so they don't want to hurt anybody. Yeah, they're just fighting fascism. Why are they a problem? It's like, yeah, and North Korea is called the fucking Democratic Republic of North Korea, so therefore it must be that. But they defended him, and that actually emboldened the act out more, and that's how we got what happened at Charlottesville. It's mainly because of Antifa. They showed up and they weren't supposed to. They didn't have a license. They just showed up and started fighting people. So I don't know what this guy's talking about, except that, of course, he's like going along with his version of shit. So
well, it's like I said, it was mythologizing this event.
Yes,
and
exactly.
They're creating a narrative. Now, I haven't looked into it myself, so I can't say for certain what happened or whose version of events. But as soon as somebody starts with the emotive language and the creeping sense of threat, I'm like, I think I'm going to just step back and not make a conclusion from this.
Sure.
I'm just going to, I have no reason to believe that Brian is incorrect in his estimation. I just have not looked at the facts yet. And until I do, I'm just going to remain emotionally neutral on this issue. The end.
All right, moving on.
And it was clear that they were ready for a fight. I wanted to capture it and like see both sides in terms of what people had to say to provide a greater perspective, because I think there's an issue with like, you know, liberal circles and mental masturbation and like people reinforcing the same ideas. It's important to see what the other side has to say. But it became very clear to me very quickly that this was not a place to have an interview, because there were people beating each other with sticks and hammers and poles, and there was tear gas flying.
All right, stop it, please. This is not the place to, fair enough. You know, that probably wasn't the place to have an interview or to talk to them. But on your side, you recognize absolutely no legitimate dissent. Nobody can disagree with you and be a decent human being. That's your side. You won't talk to the quote-unquote Nazis at Charlottesville. You also won't talk to people like us. Like, we have criticized the alt-right. And or whatever the white ethno-state people are, what they call themselves. We've criticized them.
Yeah.
We've criticized your side as well when you engage in the same activities that they're engaging in, which is mythologizing events and then making people's humanity contingent on your version of the event. So if I disagree with your version of Charlottesville, I am now a Nazi. If I believe that the so-called Nazis at Charlottesville should be able to express their version of events, I am also a Nazi. There's no group of people who you can regard as having a legitimate disagreement with you, individual and being interviewed in this podcast. So this means that you should not be establishing the narrative, this historical narrative, because there is no way you can be criticized without you regarding your critics as being subhuman or put into a category like Nazi or racist or fascist. You have so many words to dismiss any kind of criticism of your conclusions or your attitude towards history or your agenda or what you want to say. You have no willingness to regard people's criticism of you as being legitimate. That in and of itself means that you should not be in the position that you want to be in as an arbiter of history. That's all it takes to disqualify you. And if you do have people who disagree with you on a fundamental sense, not just mildly, because it seems to me that me disagreeing with you because I'm a moderate, I'm not over on the other side thinking that we need an ethno state. Not there. I'm in a moderate position. I'm like, I think the Western civilization is a good thing. Let's do what we can to preserve it. That's my position. I'm a moderate, and you think that I'm illegitimate.
Yeah.
There's nothing you don't, that except for absolute lockstep agreement that you would consider legitimate. All right, go ahead, Brian. Sorry.
No, I was gonna say you're actually the target though, because he says in another clip that the people that he's hoping to target with his VR AR project are the moderates, are the white moderates that he thinks can get, essentially he can affect with the white guilt, the people that he thinks he can change the minds of, because he believes that the radicals, which I don't know how big he thinks it is, but he believes that the radicals are, he's not going to be able to get their attention. It's going to be the moderates that he's going to target. So they are the people that he's hoping to affect. And I think that's actually the tack that, most of the people within the Black Lives Matter, feminism, and other sort of like left-wing organizations do, is they target the silent majority hoping and assuming that they're too dumb and lazy to actually do the research, and they'll just believe and swallow whatever they tell them. And I think that's actually the plan. And I know that that's a little bit, well, you know, I don't even think it's a stretch to say that. It seems to be the case because that's actually, in our own way, that's what we're hoping to do too, right? Like, we don't expect that we're going to change the minds of feminists, but maybe there'll be some men and women that have a feeling that something is wrong with the, you know, with the way things are going in terms of divorce rates and fatherlessness and, you know, child custody and all of these experiences they see, whether it's anecdotal or personal. I think that they would be the ones that stand to benefit the most from watching our content and experiencing our discussions. So I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that that's what he's doing, because I think tactically it makes sense, right?
Well, no, it's not. The problem is that he doesn't regard any criticism or deviation from his belief system to be legitimate.
Absolutely.
That's the problem. That's not that he wants to talk to moderates. It's that he doesn't want to talk to moderates. He wants to lecture to moderates.
Yes, he
wants
to convert
explain to them how they are bad people. Regardless, like as a quote unquote moderate, I actually do not think that his interventions will actually affect the change that he wants to see in Black communities. I think that what Black communities need is a return of Black masculinity and a valuing of Black men in their families and as mentors. Valuing and respect for Black men. That's what I think Black communities need, not handouts.
Yep. Actually, I think the problem with both the radical left and the alt-right is the same. They actually have the same problem, and that's why one of the things I wanted to, I'm trying to bring up more and more, is that the issues between men and women are at the root of all these problems. It's just a matter of how they're dealing with it. For example, the feminists and the BLMs and all that, it's all feminism, really. But like, that ideology wants to destroy masculinity because it thinks it is the cause of all these problems. And whenever there are more problems that come out, they find new ways to just blame masculinity. That's why no matter how far down the trash heap the Black community falls, no matter how bad it gets, no matter how many people end up killing each other, no matter how bad it gets within the Black community, the more that Black activists and Black Lives Matter and feminists will say the problem is men, the problem is masculinity, the problem is men in power, the problem is white supremacy, which is also men, because they leave women out of that too, right? Or they even start attacking women, which they're doing now by saying white feminism is like the new thing that they're going after. But they're just rebranding feminism. It's just to save itself. It's just a new way of doing it. It's like shedding your skin, you know, and saying, well, that's not my feminism. That's white feminism. But here's the new improved feminism that's more inclusive, but it's still feminism. And then
when they go after white feminists, there's a caveat there. It enables white feminists to advocate for minority issues. They become the representative of minorities when it comes to interacting with white men. So even though they're attacking the whiteness of white feminists, by they're actually handing advocacy to white women. They're saying, you are going to be the advocates of our issues to powerful white men. Even as they are attacking, and they're giving white feminists that the moral self-righteousness, the moral imperium to judge white men. And it always ends up being that white men are at the center, the crosshairs of all of this. There's a reason for it. But continue. Sorry, Brian.
Well, no, and then okay, so that's on the left side. And then on the right, the alt-right are trying, what they're doing, I think it stems from the fact that they also have a misguided sense of masculinity. They don't know, they want to reclaim it, but they don't know what it is, because they have also been denied the same things. They've been denied their masculinity. They've been denied fathers. They've been denied what it means to be male. And that's why so many in the alt-right are men. And that's why a lot of trad thoughts join it too. And I think that it is a problem on both sides. Jordan Peterson talked about how the alt-right they're dealing with an identity crisis that they think is about whiteness, but it's about maleness. That's what's missing. And I think that it's the damage is, yeah, he said it was maleness.
Okay, go, continue.
No, I'm just saying that's the problem. That's what it comes down to is masculinity is dwindling. It's not valued. It's been tossed aside, and now people are scrambling to figure out what's wrong. But it's like when Velma from Scooby-Doo loses her glasses and she's like on the ground going, "Where are my glasses? I can't see without them." And they're trying to grab whatever, but that's the thing that's missing. It's masculinity on both sides.
Okay, I'll get in there and maybe see if I can add to that.
All right.
When you look at the regressive stack, and you look at the expectation that minority men sort of check their manhood at the door before they get into the regressive stack, if there was a way to integrate a recognition of the problems that minority men face and their manhood, so that it's not at cross purposes. Because it is, because manhood as we've defined it now, without that biological component of saying this is actually a manifestation of the hormonal system of adult males. So it's innate. This idea of looking at and first reaching for your ability to do something before reaching for your victimhood. So I think that's actually innate to men. But we've defined it in such a way that it seems like it's not biologically innate. It's actually something that's derived out of the identity of man. So the men have to achieve it by virtue of acting in this particular way. And if they don't, it's not there. It's not latent to men. It's just out. It comes out of their training by society. Society elicits manhood out of men, I think is where I'm going with that. But because there's these sort of countervailing factors against recognizing men being victims or having issues or problems because they're men, minority men can't actually integrate the problems that they face with being a man. So they have to check their manhood at the door, and feminism really exploits the crap out of that. By taking those issues that are actually faced by minority men, and they're also faced by white men, but there are some issues that are more faced by minority men. It takes those issues, and because minority men can't recognize that they're facing them because they're men, not just because they're minorities, it strips the masculinity out, and then it just moves that stuff up the pipeline to white women. And if there was a way for minority men to actually be able to recognize the harms that they are facing, and recognize that part of the harms that they're facing is the devaluing and the lack of respect for minority manhood, if they could recognize that, they would cut the regressive stack in half, and they would destroy the intersectional pipeline. It would be gone. And a lot of the white liberal men who use all of this as a way to avoid what I've noticed, and this is interesting. I had this meeting with a young man who was a website producer, and I would talk about the issues that men face, and he would say, after talking about it, but women have it worse, right? That's a psychological mechanism to remove having to consider that he has problems as a man. So he can maintain that sense of manhood, that there's nothing that his manhood can't overcome. There's no circumstance that he can't be put in that he can't overcome as a man, because he's a man. And that's why I think a lot of these young liberal men are drawn to intersectionality, to feminism, because it gives them that psychological mechanism to avoid looking at issues that maybe he can't overcome just by virtue of his individuality and his manhood. So that's why they're getting drawn into that. And then you have the white ethnostatist guys. What's happening with the regressive stack is it's starting to implode and start to feed on itself, and starting to superficially target white women. And in the process of targeting white women, a lot of the power of the regressive stack is that it makes white women appear to be victims of things that minorities are actually victims of. So white men take notice and they care. But when the regressive stack starts targeting white women itself, there are going to be white men who start to say that the regressive stack and minorities are the problem. It's inevitable. So they are actually creating the white ethnostate people and the people who are seeing their attacks on white women and they are not going to tolerate it. I mean, white men will tolerate a lot of stuff from minorities, but they will not tolerate them attacking white women. And even that will even suck in, eventually will suck in even liberal men. If minorities take their attacks on white women further than this kind of superficial, almost ceremonial, I'm passing, you must bow before me, and as I pass to you the moral imperium of the minority issues. If they take their attacks any further, even liberal men, I think, are probably going to end up opposing the minorities, because you can attack white women to a certain extent, and white men will tolerate it. But if you attack them past that certain extent, they won't. And that's what we're seeing with the rise of white nationalism. They are not tolerating that. And now, because they're attacking white women, they're starting to identify with the vulnerability of whiteness, which is allowing them to rise in prominence and develop their own moral authority, moral imperium. So essentially, the regressive stack is creating white nationalism. And it's all because liberal men cannot recognize, liberal white men cannot integrate the possibility of being vulnerable in with their identity. That is what it all stems from. And then we also have more conservative white men who are adopting the vulnerability of whiteness because white women are being attacked based on whiteness. And this is the makings of a civil war, to be quite frank. And it's going to be a mess. And the only real solution to all of this is finding a way to square that circle, to allow men to remain men while still accepting the possibility of vulnerability. And once you do that, there is no pressure for liberal men to adopt the regressive stack, and there's no pressure for conservative men to adopt white ethno-nationalism.
Yeah, I think that on some level, the progressive stack, or regressive stack as you're calling it, the people who put that together, the SJWs, they want this. I think they want a war. And I think that they know on some level that this is inevitably going to happen, that they're going to push until, there are very clear lines that are drawn. And
well, yeah, but ironically, both sides will be identical to the other.
Yes.
In the end.
Yes. Well, they already are in a lot of ways. I mean, I don't even think that the alt-right is right-wing. I honestly don't. I think that that's just a name that they gave themselves. But a lot of the stuff that they advocate for policy-wise and in terms of like... this
is not a conservative position.
No.
Like this idea of putting everybody in their little camps has never been tried in the past. So it's a completely radically new position.
Yeah. I don't think that that's... Yeah, because they're I don't think they are. That's just my I don't want to get into it because I know that takes some time. But the other thing I wanted to add to what you were saying, I'm trying to remember now. There was I think that on some level they want this, and also I was going to say that I had been saying that the alt-right was created by the regressive left. And I don't mean that they that they put it together. I think that they created it in that they pushed really hard for more and more and more, and they made people respond to it. The alt-right only exists because the left got out of hand. And
because nobody gave a shit about the Ku Klux Klan and they disappeared, basically.
No. And basically you've given them, some cause for legitimacy, or at least an appearance of legitimacy. And that's what I'm getting at. Like I said this before, like back in Gamergate days when, we were talking about how far the left is pushed, and I said they're going to make the right do this, or at least people who see themselves as on the right respond. And you're going to create this, and this is what's happening. It's just like I predicted. So I got some more super chats, and do you want to call it after that?
Yeah, let's go through it, but let's not say we're going to call it because everybody will leave at this moment. Don't leave.
Yeah. Don't leave. Let's do the super chats, and then we'll see. Maybe there'll be some other stuff that comes through. So Frank Tomeo gives us $5 Canadian and says, changing history is really sick. How do we learn from history if we don't know it? Freaking retards. Then Frank gives us another $2 Canadian and says, feminism is cancer, 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 cancer. That's four cancers. And then Frank Timeo gives us $2 Canadian again and says, did I say cancer enough? That's why I stopped calling it first, second, third wave feminism. And now I call it first, second, third stage feminism, because that's more in cancerous terms. Yeah, so we're getting to fourth stage feminism now. And then French Honey Badger gives us $5 and says, fascism has always been a reaction movement against communists. Mussolini and Franco took power because commies were threatening private property. But fascism is also a left-wing ideology. So that's it. That's all I got. That's all the super chat. So do you want to say some stuff? Tie off the sausage?
Yeah, I'm going to tie off the sausage because this is quite a long sausage. A little bit too excessive. Sausage is the length of the show, by the way. Usually I was trying to aim for an hour and a half, and here we are at 2 hours. Okay, so if you want to join us in the after show where we will be discussing more of this lovely podcast, you can go to www.patreon.com/honeybadgerradio and pledge per episode for as many episodes as you would like. Patreon will give you the option to pledge for 1 or 100. So you can make that decision. That's www.patreon.com/honeybadgerradio. And you can join us, and me and Brian will continue the discussion in the after show. Or if you are interested in seeing us go to London for the International Conference on Men's Issues #4, you can go to www.feedthebadger.com, select Badgers Take Britain Take 2, and put some money in the hat. We are going to try to get to London, Manchester, and Amsterdam, and we're going to try to get Hannah and Brian to those places as well. I apologize for the one fundraiser on the heels of the other, but unfortunately our lawsuit and the ICMI coincided in the same month this year, which is really unusual. But anyway, if you want to see the Badgers in the UK, www.feedthebadger.com, and I hope we're able to go, but that will be up to you. So do go and put a few shekels in the hat. All right, Brian, I'm done.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on this Week in Culture War episode. Please continue the discussion below. I'd like to hear your thoughts on the podcast. You should listen to the full thing for more context. Don't take my word for it, because I had to pick a few things out of it. And yeah, I look forward to seeing your comments. But please like, favorite, share, subscribe, notifications, the usual stuff. And we'll talk to you guys next.